Good evening from wherever you're joining us. A very warm welcome to all of you. I see we have 64 participants already and we have more people joining us, but it's now 5 minutes past the hour and I would like us to start the program this afternoon. My name is Doreen Odongo. I work with Award African Women in Agricultural Research and Development. I am your moderator for today, and I'm very excited to be moderating this conversation today as we formally mark the beginning of the first cohort of our newest fellowship, the GRASP Fellowship, what is the GRASP Fellowship again? Here I am forgetting the GRASP Fellowship. But yeah, a very warm welcome to you. Gender Responsive Agriculture Systems Policy Fellowship, GRASP Fellowship. That is our newest initiative, and you will be hearing more about it in a few minutes. We are very excited and a very, very special welcome to the Award Policy Fellows, the 50 women who have selected from 60 countries that are the ones that are making the inaugural cohort of the GRASP Fellowship. So today they are joining us as we mark the beginning of their fellowship journey, as they will embark on a 2-year journey, and we will hear more about what they will be experiencing in the two-year journey. And so this afternoon, we are having a conversation around policies and gender responsive policies. And we have up an exciting group of experts who are working in the gender space, in the agriculture space, and in policy space. And we are looking forward to having a conversation about how we can unlock the potential of gender responsive agricultural policies to accelerate inclusive development on the continent. So like I mentioned, my name is Doreen Odongo. I'll be moderating the conversation today. And a warm welcome to all of you. So before we begin, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the events, how it will run for the next 1.5 hours or so. We will be having opening remarks from our director. And then after the opening remarks, we'll go straight into the conversation, into the dialogue. We want you to be part of the dialogue, to join our expert panel. So we will be requesting you to engage us on the chat. The chat function is open. Please make use of the chat function. Introduce yourself, tell us who you are and where you're joining us from. I would like to request the award policy fellows to kindly rename themselves and indicate that they are a fellow so that our visitors know who the guests are today, because the award policy fellows really are our guests today. You're our guests of honor today. So kindly rename yourselves so that we can know that you're one of the 50 who have been selected and who have been awarded the GRASP Fellowship. We are recording the event, so please be aware that we are recording the event, and your chats, including private chats, will be visible to the organizers. We are also streaming the event live on YouTube, and we are live tweeting. So we invite you to help us tweet away. The hashtag is gender in ag policy, hashtag gender in ag policy, but you can also use hashtag GRASP Fellowship. My colleagues will be dropping down the link to our handles on Twitter, as well as the hashtags for you to help us extend the conversation to the audience that is not able to join us live. And then finally, we will be inviting you to ask questions to the panel. Like I said, we want this to be as interactive as possible. There's a Q&A session there for you to type in your questions if you can, and please you can state who you're directing the question to so that it's easier for us to monitor and get them addressed. But we will be also inviting you to give us your views about the topic of discussion today through Menti. So at some point, I'll open up for the audience and the participants to talk to us and to tell us what they think about issues to do with gender policies and how to accelerate progress in that area. I think those are the only announcements I have for now. So please, if you can, Engage us, indulge us, tell us who you are, where you're joining us from the chat, and we will engage you. We are going to be posting the hashtag and our Twitter handles. And a very warm welcome to you once again. Without further ado, I'm now going to welcome Dr. Susan Karia. Dr. Susan Karia is the Director of Award, and she will give us the opening remarks. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doreen. And a warm welcome to everyone who is online, who is joining us here today. Welcome to the launch of the inaugural cohort of the Gender Responsive Agriculture Systems Policy Fellowship, which, as you can tell, it's quite a mouthful. A warm welcome to the GRASP Fellows, to their mentors. A warm welcome to these distinguished panelists who are joining us today, who will be part of the policy dialogue. To all the participants, a warm welcome to the award staff, to the A-team trainers, to the associates who are working with them, the policy experts. It is my immense pleasure to finally see the launch of the Mentoring Orientation Workshop. We've been working on this the whole year. And I wish to thank the award staff that has worked tirelessly to finalize the selection, to finalize the Mentoring Orientation Workshop agenda and the content. And I also want to thank the panel of experts that supported us to make sure that the selection was done in a fair manner. So we also had experts who helped us. So a warm welcome to the policy dialogue with the leading experts. It's entitled How to Unlock the Potential of Gender Responsive Agricultural Policies to Accelerate Inclusive Development. This is part of a series of dialogues that are going to be part of the GRASP Fellowship Initiative. And they're really aimed at curating conversations with key stakeholders on how to intensify efforts towards fostering policy change for equitable agri-food systems in Africa. So why is it important to have gender responsive policies? Let me begin by saying that the shocks we've seen, shocks such as the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, the conflict we've seen not only in Ukraine, in Ethiopia, and in other parts of Africa, has really brought to sharp focus the fragility of our food systems, disrupting food supply chains, resulting in increased food prices, impacting not only the economy, but also impacting household incomes, food production, etc. And the emerging evidence that has come from the most recent, the UN State of Food and Nutrition report, it's called the SOFI 22, shows that hunger has been increasing from 2019 to 2020 in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And the report also finds that hunger continued to rise in 2021. So for example, in Africa, there are 278 million people facing hunger in 2021. The SOFI 2022 report also finds that there is a gender gap in food insecurity and that it has widened substantially under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic and the other shocks. In particular, in 2021, the gender gap in food insecurity widened further, where now it was at 31.9% of women in the world were moderately or severely food insecure, compared to 27.6% of the men. What we do know is that achieving gender equality and the empowerment of rural women and men, of rural women and girls, is an essential element to achieve food security and nutrition, eradicate poverty, but also leaving no one behind. At the same time, to address this, we know that there are substantial gender inequalities in African agriculture. All the statistics tell us women contribute substantially to agricultural production. However, compared to men, they face substantial constraints in accessing productive resources, services, markets, assets, and opportunities. And closing the gender gap in agriculture, we know would generate significant gains, not only in the agriculture sector, but to the economy at large. So, but for this to happen, to close the gender gap, we know that policies have an important role to play. So during the UN Food System Summit, we organized, as a gender lever of change, we organized regional consultations to hear the voices of women and the voices of people who are talking about some of the areas that were important to address. And one of the areas we kept hearing time and time again was that it is important to integrate gender in food systems policies, because this would provide the legal framework for driving action and allocating the required investments to not only close the gender gap, but also to address the underlying causes of gender equality and women's empowerment in food systems. So we know that policy reforms can actually eliminate gender-based discrimination and also promote equal access to resources, services, opportunities, allowing women and men to equally benefit, to participate and benefit from the opportunities in food systems. So this is where we see this new fellowship, our newest fellowship, the GRASP Fellowship. It is funded by the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and it responds to these challenges. The GRASP Fellowship was announced at the UN Food System Summit in 2021. And let me tell you what the fellowship is a little bit about, although I am quite sure that my colleagues who will come later will talk a lot more about it. The GRASP Fellowship, it is a non-residential career development program that's targeting African women who are interested in policy making and also working in the field of agriculture and food systems. Through this fellowship, we aim to grow a pool of confident and capable African women who can lead policy changes to improve livelihoods of smallholder women and farmers. So the first cohort, which we have here today, targets 6 countries. I think Doreen talked about it. These are Malawi, Nigeria, Zambia, Ghana, Kenya, and Uganda. I should inform you that we will be launching the call for cohort 2 just before the end of this year, and that will include some countries such as Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Senegal, Madagascar, Rwanda, and a few others. So today we are very excited to launch the first cohort of 50 women policy fellows with their mentors, and we will be expecting them to also identify 50 fellows mentees, because this is the kind of model that award works with. This non-residential fellowship is going to be having both virtual and in-person activities spread over a 2-year period. And we will offer customized training, very much the award model, which is mentoring, advanced leadership, negotiation skills. But then we've added other aspects, how do you look at gender in agriculture policies, master classes on policy processes, amongst others. The fellowship will also have some catalytic fund that will enable the policy fellows to actually have a policy innovation project, which could be individually or in groups, within countries, or even at a regional level. The whole impact, the whole idea is that we hope this fellowship will catalyze the design and implementation of gender-responsive agriculture policies across the African continent. So as I close, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And I know you, like me, are looking forward to a very stimulating policy dialogue. Thank you so much. And over to you, Doreen.
Thank you, Susan, for the overview of GRASP. And thank you very much for highlighting the situation and how dire it is. I mean, we cannot overemphasize the gender gap that persists in agriculture. But now we are seeing that the gender gap is not just in agricultural production, but it's also spreading into food insecurity. There's increasing hunger, but then we have more women and children are hungry than men. And that really sets the stage for the conversation that is coming with my panel of experts. But before I go to the panel of experts, I'm informed that we're facing some technical challenges with the chat function. Please, in the meantime, as we try to sort that out, you feel free to use the Q&A section to type your name, who you are, where you're joining us, or any questions that you have. I understand there's a slight challenge with the chat function. Yes, so please, if you will indulge us. My apologies for that. So I want us to switch and to go directly to the panel conversation this afternoon, which is going to take about 1 hour, including the audience engagement and the Q&A from the floor. And I want to introduce my panelists. I have 3 panelists. And I'll start with Dr. Boaz Kezire, who is the head of policy and advocacy at AGRA. AGRA, like a word, I think is the home of acronyms. We get very comfortable in our acronyms. So GRASP award. So a warm welcome to Dr. Boaz Kezire. Dr. Boaz Kezire is joined by Dr. Anshale from the FAO in Kenya, the Food and Agriculture Organization. Anshale is the head of the policy unit at FAO. And the third panelist is Ms. Jessica Anor, who is the head of the gender unit at the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, whom I think also renamed themselves to yet another acronym, AUDA, if I'm not wrong. But they'll all tell us about themselves and briefly about their organizations. And I want us to go straight into the first question that is going to open the conversation today, directed to Boaz. Boaz, we've heard Susan really painting the picture about the situation and why there's the fundamental importance of policies in putting in place a structure or a legal framework to address some of these issues that we're facing in agriculture if we are to achieve inclusive development. And I want to turn to you and to make reference to the UN Food System Summit. The UN Food System Summit had a scientific group, and in one of its papers that focused on equitable livelihoods, the scientific group emphasized the need to develop and implement policies that will eliminate barriers to access and use of services and resources for agricultural production. Now, could you please share with us how African governments are addressing this challenge, and what is the role of national pathways in accelerating African food systems transformation?
Thanks so much, Doreen. I'm glad to be part of this panel. I think the only male panelist on this particular case, and I'm grateful for the invitation by Awad to join you to discuss some of these very fundamental topics. First of all, just to reiterate one of the key points, and thanks, Susan, for bringing some of those very key issues and ideas and the statistics that we have on the continent. I think Africa is the continent that has agriculture as one of its biggest assets, just to give you the context of the whole discussion. Because only agriculture will be able to create jobs for everybody, will be able to create opportunities for not only women, but also youth and other vulnerable groups. So it's a huge asset for the continent, and not just only for food, but also other livelihoods. So going back to the topic that you've mentioned, Doreen, just taking a step back a little bit to look at what the UN Secretary General, in calling for the UN Food System Summit, he was confronted with. Because the 2020 UN Food Systems Report was indicating that literally no country on the globe was on track to achieve the SDG targets by 2030. So there was a cause for concern that business as usual is not going to take the continent and the rest of the world anywhere. And yet the targets were not that fundamental or big. So that's when the Secretary General of the UN called for the summit really to take a step back and reiterate on some of the fundamental issues. And I think, as Susan was explaining, a key game-changing idea was the nature and the type of dialogues that brought on board most of the vulnerable groups and the often neglected actors on the continent, for Africa at least. So we are really happy that various players engaged. There were a lot of groups, different other types of groups that were involved in the discussions, ideally to chart the way forward on what would constitute how to fast track driving not only agriculture, but food systems on the continent and beyond. And as you will notice, Africa was actually be able to come very strongly in terms of engaging the food systems agenda. 37 countries were on board, including their heads of states. They presented their national pathways, ideas, and game-changing solutions on what would actually change the continent. But out of those particular pathways, one of the things that we were able to see and continue to appreciate what Africa was able to do was coming up with the African Union Common Position under the leadership of AU and NEPAD. Jessica is on the call and the panel, and she can talk about that. But I think the leadership at the continental level, if you're talking about policy and direction, the continent was united in terms of providing direction on what Africa's direction and agenda would look like to address food and agriculture on the continent as regards the UN agenda. So that was the first demonstration of commitment from an African perspective. And I think we applaud those leaders that showed up at the UN food system that were able to provide their solutions and game-changing ideas. And moving from that, and your question was, how do you translate the ideas, the solutions, the pathways that the leaders were able to put in place? And what we've been able to see, and as an organization, as AGRA, we started working with the NEPAD, we started with the African Union. How do you translate pathways into actions? Because we noticed on the continent that various countries have strategies, they have plans, they're putting in place policies. Some of these policies are not effectively implemented. They actually lie on the shelf, depending on which country you are in. But I think the novel idea that we'll be able to see and what we are supporting a few countries is translate some of these pathways into what we would start by calling the national food system strategies and investment plans. But beyond plans and strategies that address gaps over and above what has been existing in terms of the implementation, to really look at those specific peculiar challenges that speak to inclusion, for example. You know, to what extent are we able to develop business cases? Thank you very much for that. So translating pathways and investment plans into actions and really rally the global community, the continent itself, but also plus private sector, civil society, to invest human and financial resources to tackle some of those gaps and challenges. And some of the policy ideas have already been discussed. I think Susan was beginning to touch some of them. You know, how do you really create policies that respond to access to productive assets by often neglected groups, such as access to agricultural finance, credits, because of the uniqueness of some of these particular groups, and mainly youth and women. The other ones relate to really access to productive assets like land, because I think I am not going to be an authority in speaking about the challenges that gender and other forms of vulnerable groups have in accessing productive assets. But I think what we know from policy is that the way and strategies are designed, they do not provide specific incentives to cater for those who are not able to attract some of these particular cases. So we really applaud the continent for the kind of strong effort, strong momentum that are put in place. But beyond that, strategies and plans, we need to see more implementation and allocation of the right resources to some of these unique characteristics that have been able to be identified at the UN Food Systems Summit, as well as country pathways. And then we continue to really create more advocacy efforts and mobilize resources, financial and human, to make sure that in countries where investments are supposed to be taking place, they are not only captured and invested in, but they are being tracked. I'm sure, Jessica, if you talk about this, you also bring some issues like at the African Union, you are aware that we are developing, or the continent is developing, a tracking mechanism that has been in place for the last couple of years, really tracking agriculture and food systems transformation. The CADA biannual review that has gender-specific indicators that track the extent to which gender-related actions are brought on board. And the trigger mechanism is that once you track and show progress, you are able to go back and invest rightly. So I will end it at that, Doreen, just end by saying governments are making strong commitments, and these commitments don't end at commitment, they need to be translated into action. They are developing national strategic and investment plans. They are designing coordination mechanisms and as well as accountability systems to make sure that these policies don't end on shelf, but there is investments and results are being tracked and showcased at various levels. I'll leave at that and then we'll take questions later as you guide us. Over.
Thank you, Boaz. Thank you for showing us that there's indeed hope, at least there's progress, and that we need to move beyond the pathways, translating them into actions. I'm hearing you say that we need to move beyond the strategies and the investment plans that have been designed, the beautiful ones, to go into implementation and allocation of resources. You've talked about advocacy efforts. And I'm curious to hear from you, and I think I'm going to invite you to post in the chat if you have any links to any of those. I know that AGRA is at the forefront of doing some of these things, and probably if you could lead us to some of the examples of the work that you've led in helping our governments, to put together implementation plans, to help them interrogate how they are allocating their resources, as well as the advocacy efforts that you're heading. Probably if you have a minute, you can post in the chat, and some of our audience today can have a look at those ones. I'd like to turn to Anne. And Anne, Susan mentioned in her opening how the SOFI report has revealed the gender gap in food insecurity, that there's more women that are severely affected with the hunger than men. Yes, it's increasing, but we are seeing more women affected. And so, which means that the gender gap in food insecurity has grown. What policy processes are needed to address these concerns?
Thank you very much, Doreen, and good afternoon and good morning, participants. As the previous participants have, panelists Susan and Boaz have indicated, we are off track globally in terms of achieving SDG 2. And you find that statistics, yes, indicate a rise in the level of food insecurity, but that increasing gender gap, and women are more negatively affected. Of course, all of us know the important role women play in agriculture, and we also know the vulnerabilities that they face and the challenges that they face, challenges of reduced economic empowerment and cultural related challenges and so on. But one of the biggest challenges, I think, is in as far as the cost of food is concerned, because post-COVID and with all the challenges that are there, the Ukraine war, the effect of the COVID disruptions on the food value chains, the cost of food has escalated. And this, of course, has really affected the accessibility of this food, particularly to women who are less economically empowered than the men. So that and many more factors like the extremities that are brought about by climate change and so on and so forth. So in terms of policy responses that can address this, we need policy responses that actually target these challenges, to try and reverse the negative effect of these challenges. And I think what governments need to do is to prioritize better, prioritize the policies better, target better. We need to tweak the policies so that they actually deliberately address these challenges. For example, in the case of the cost of food, we need specific policy instruments that actually ensure that food is affordable in an equitable way. And not just food, we also need to look at the quality of that food. We look at the dietary diversity. We need to make healthy diets affordable across the board. So policies must be much better in terms of targeting to address those specific challenges. At the production level, we must increase productivity, and not just productivity of the basic food commodities that policies have targeted in the past, but commodities that ensure that diets are healthy and diverse. Then we must also have policies that address challenges at the market level, markets, access to markets, trade issues. We must address trade barriers in terms of tariffs, in terms of infrastructure barriers, and so on and so forth, because these also have a role to play in making the food not just affordable, but also accessible. then of course we must also ensure that the communities, particularly the women who are less endowed and in terms of economic empowerment and also knowledge, that they are made more aware, their capacity to understand the issue of use of or application of utilization of more diverse diets. So the issue of education, knowledge dissemination to the communities so that we try and close that digital divide. So the whole idea of tweaking policies so that they're actually targeting the challenges that are affecting the food and nutrition security and the equitable achievement of that. And then, of course, we also need, as we tweak the policies, we also need to ensure that these policies are funded. The issue of implementation of policies sometimes is a challenge because you develop the policies, you prioritize them, but you're not following these with the necessary resources that ensure that these policies are actually implemented. And we also need to look at the aspect of how do you communicate these policy decisions to the consumers, to the community, so that they are aware of, their rights, they are aware of what they are entitled to. So packaging these policies in a way that is easy to understand and actually disseminating this information so that you create demand for what the rights that are, the entitlements that are brought about by these policy decisions. For now, I think I'll stop there. Over to you, Doreen.
Thank you, Anne. I'm hearing you talk about the need to have policies that are better targeted. You've also talked about funding, very fundamental, very important. Boaz actually also mentioned resource allocation. And something else that you highlighted that is very important is about the packaging and the dissemination of these policies to the relevant actors so that there's sort of a common understanding about some of the options that we need to take. And I'd like to just in the same breath, move to Jessica. And Jessica, I know that NEPAD, AU has been at the forefront of some of these policy responses or policy priorities, being the organization that convenes different countries. Boaz mentioned the unity that has been seen with the African governments and the voices of the African governments being amplified during the whole conversation of the Food System Summit. And what are some of the policy priority policy areas for fostering gender equitable and inclusive food systems transformation? So beyond just having policies, we need to have gender equitable and inclusive food systems transformation. So what are some of the priority areas that we need to look at or to consider when it comes to policies? Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry for that. No, thank you so much, Doreen, for giving me the floor. First of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to be part of the launch of the GRASP Fellowship. And I love acronyms, so I don't have any issue with that. But I want to recall what Dr. Susan said, and it's true that women play a vital role in contribution to agriculture and other related sectors. But we know that deep-rooted gender inequality persists. So they lack control over productive assets, such as land, as Dr. Boaz recalled, and livestock in accessing technology, in irrigation, credit, extension services and market, financial capital, and also they don't have the same access to advisory services compared to men. So these are very well-known fact, and we know that women in agriculture, they produce nearly 80% of household food and contribute to 39% of continental GDP. So now that we have said that, what are the priority policy areas? We all know that policymakers could act by strengthening women's land rights to ensure that they improve their situation in agriculture, improving their access to markets, labor, and labor-saving tools, such as also seeds and high-quality fertilizers. And they could also invest more in human capital while also improving childcare and spread agricultural knowledge. But I would like to focus on 5 points because those points are very well known. The ones that I want to focus on are number 1, gender responsive budgeting. I think this is really key, and we also need to have an increase in the agricultural budget to provide equal or more favorable conditions for rural women to access funds, and provide special measure to support women's association and cooperatives. That's number 1. Now, number 2, it is key to include women and young people in decision-making about agricultural priorities and investment. And in both policy and practice, we need to provide space for them to really contribute, because we cannot say that we are going to, change women's life and young people's life without having them at the table. Number 3, I think it's very key to have affirmative action when it comes to gender responsive procurement and women entering the value chain. For instance, as part of the National Agriculture Investment Plans, the NIPs, we could include strategies and opportunities that will favor participation of women and youth into attractive agribusiness. So for instance, we could ensure that we have quotas for women-owned agri-enterprise to be included in the NIPs. Number 4, and that is something that is very dear to AUD and NEPAD, investing in technical vocational education and training. So for instance, at AUD and NEPAD, we have a program called Agricultural Technical and Vocational Education Training for Women, ATVET for Women. So what we do, we give women some technical vocational skills, and also we try to help them venture into fields that have been male-dominated. For instance, in Ghana, we help women learn to drive trucks, and that has been very successful. So the 5 pillars of that ATVET for Women as number 1, strengthen the TVET systems for full women's participation, curriculum development, so that we impart practical skills in value chain that promotes women economic empowerment. Number 3, training delivery. So we build the capacity of trainers on how to train women. Number 4, institutional support. We ensure that training centers accommodate women fully. For instance, those training centers may have some daycare and childcare facilities. And number 5, entrepreneurial skills. We make sure the women get some income from the practical skills that they learn through ATVET for Women. So technical and vocational training is key. And number 5, and that is the last but not least for me, we need to work also on cultural, social, and cultural norm. For instance, working on power relations and intra-household decision-making through innovative approach. So we have in commitment number 4 of the Malabo Declaration, halving poverty by 2025, a specific sub-target saying that calling on member states to support and facilitate preferential entry and participation for women and youth in gainful and attractive agribusiness opportunities. So we see that there's room for more to be done, and in a very innovative manner. So if we want a shift in the status quo, we need to work on the norms, on the social norms. And cognizant of that, recently, like it was just last week at the margin of the AU Summit on industrialization, I organized a special training for women in food processing. And not only were they given they were not only given tools such as financial literacy, e-commerce models on packaging, but I also ensured that they were trained on personal branding and on understanding notions such as emotional intelligence, because we in the development field, we don't really tackle these kind of soft skills, but we shouldn't underestimate the lack of self-confidence, low self-esteem, and mental health burdens that are due to harmful social cultural norms that the women are carrying with them. So as policymakers, we also need to tackle those. So to conclude, a transformational continental agenda for food system is not possible without fully including women in agriculture and understanding the issues that they go through and tackling them properly through gender perspective embedded in development programs and policy, and also committing the investment necessary to implement those policies. I thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you very much. Wow, really powerful points there. And one of the things that stands out for me is every speaker has talked about resource allocation, but you've come to tell us that it's not just about resource allocation, but it needs to be gender responsive. So gender responsive budgeting. I'm sure many of our award fellows and other participants like myself are interested in knowing more about gender responsive budgeting. And do you have any kind of resources that you've developed at the AU that you could share with us that we could refer to? It's also important to note that you've highlighted the need to give the space for women and the youth to contribute. Sort of have mechanisms for amplifying their voices and ensure that they're included in these conversations. Very important points to note. And at this point, I want to turn to the audience and to invite their contributions in the same line. Jessica highlighted some of the issues that we need to pay attention to. I'm inviting you. My colleagues have posted some questions on the chat through Menti, and we'd like to hear from you. What is the one thing? We have two questions. What is the one thing that actors need to pay attention to when addressing the issue of gender responsive agricultural policies? What do you think we need to pay attention to, either in addition to what has been mentioned, or are you still highlighting the same issue? And then the second question, and the links are on the chat function. I hope you can access them. I will ask my colleagues to post them again. What kinds of interventions do you think would encourage policy actors to consider gender in their processes, in their policy processes? So there's having the conversation and saying we need to be gender responsive, you need to consider gender. But how do you think we can start that conversation and start that journey? We are hearing Jessica giving us some examples of some of the things they're doing, investing in education, investing in professional training, ensuring that there's institutional support. But what else do you think we can do to encourage policy actors to consider gender in their policy processes? And also remember, we are seeing your questions. Please keep posting them. We'll come to them, but I want to turn back to Anne with a second question to her before I come to your questions. And Anne, I would like you to tell us, if you're able to tell us, what your institution is doing to foster gender responsive national agricultural policies. We know that FAO is in the forefront of working with various governments to support them. So what is your institution doing, and why is it important?
Thank you very much, Doreen. FAO is doing quite a number of things, and before I even highlight that, probably to say internally, FAO itself has a gender policy. And the thrust of that policy is to ensure that gender issues are integrated in all FAO interventions across the board towards closing that gender gap in food and nutrition security. We work to support the government in various ways. We support, for example, policy monitoring through various tools and analytics. And the importance of the policy monitoring activity is to actually examine whether resource allocation is aligned to policy priorities, because the government will set policies and prepare policy documents and indicate the policy priority areas where it intends to invest in. And through public expenditure analysis, we are able to check, whether really the money was allocated to the policy priorities as set out in the various government blueprints. And that is an important thing in actually checking whether we are achieving the policy coherence that we need for realization of the results that we set to achieve. The other thing, important thing about policy monitoring is also to check the performance in terms of compliance with international commitments, such as those under the CADIP framework, like the 10% commitment. Kenya is a signatory to the CADIP Malabo commitment to allocate 10% of budget resources to agriculture. Policy monitoring will help us to understand whether that is actually the case. And over the years, we have seen that we are still, as a country, below that commitment. And we are also able to support the CADIP process in terms of tracking the indicators that the country has committed to track in terms of checking the performance through the peer review mechanism that Boaz alluded to earlier. We also support policy prioritization, like I indicated earlier, the importance of. Sorry, I think there was an interference and I was muted. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry, there is a bit of background noise, but I hope you can hear me. I'm in the office and colleagues are also busy doing their various activities. So I hope you can hear me clearly.
Go on, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we also support the government in the prioritization process. And one of the major ways that we do this in terms of supporting policy dialogues, like the recent UN system dialogues. The whole idea is to ensure inclusivity in policy making and priority setting. So we ensure and we use our convening power and the neutrality of the UN agencies to be able to bring stakeholders together into forums where they are able to contribute freely and air their issues freely so that they are able to inform the policy-making process. The other way in which we support is the actual policy formulation itself. Government sometimes requires technical support in formulating specific pieces of policy and legislation, and we do support that in terms of technical input, in terms of analysis that provides the evidence to inform the decisions and so on and so forth. And depending on the availability of data, we can also undertake policy optimization, which is more data intensive and analysis intensive. So depending on the availability of data, we can also do policy optimization analysis that supports the government in determining the optimal combination of policy instruments for the achievement of various goals and objectives. I think for now, in summary, that is what I could put across now, and we can continue engaging as the discussion goes on. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Wow, you're doing a lot. It sounds to me like FAO is helping and supporting governments to be accountable. You're helping them, monitor and track if they're on track. You're helping them check that they're compliant to the international commitments that they signed up to. You're helping them convene and conceptualize dialogues and ensuring that the right voices are there. So really a very fundamental role that you're playing. I want to address a question to Jessica, but there's been a lot of interest on gender responsive budgeting, and I want to bring that back to you, Jessica. Somebody else, Beatrice Wamboi has asked, gender responsive budgeting is key. How do we achieve this at government level? But we also have Temi Tayo, who has said that she really likes the point of gender responsive budgeting. If you could speak more to how research will help policy to become more gender responsive in terms of resource allocation. If you're able to respond to those two questions, then I'll go to Boaz before I come back to you for the question that I had for you for the panel.
All right. No, thank you very much, Doreen, and I'm happy that there is a interest on gender responsive budgeting. So Gender responsive budgeting is basically a budget that takes into consideration all gender, I mean, women, men, girls, and boys, to ensure that there is a gender equitable distribution of resources to contribute to equal opportunities for all. So it's good for gender justice, gender equality, and fiscal justice as well. So what it does, it analyzes how the government budget have an effect on the different gender and the norms, the social cultural norms, and the roles associated with them. So what it actually involves is to transform those budgets so that gender equality commitments are realized. So for instance, how is the money raised? How is the money spent? And so on and so forth. Is the money that is being dedicated sufficient to meet women's need, men's need, boys' needs, and so on and so forth? So really having a gender perspective when it comes to budget. So it's not only a budget for women, it's way more than that. But of course, women are part of gender, so women will also be part of this gender responsive. So gender responsive budgeting involves many layers of society. It involves government, it involves the civil society, it involves NGOs, etc. They work at the different stages of the budget cycle. For instance, when it comes to government, what government should do is that they need to ensure that those who are responsible for the budget, they have the capacity to implement gender responsive budgeting. They need to also collect and publish gender disaggregated data so that people also can do analysis, data also on unpaid work, for instance, and also build the right mechanism to ensure that the resources are available to support civil society to engage with government when it comes to them playing their role in assessing gender responsive budgeting. So I don't know if I managed to respond to Beatrice's question, but now when it comes to policy research and its role on ensuring that gender responsive budgeting is applied, I think that if we manage to, to have more precise data, better understand the situation on the ground, we have a better way to leverage and to have an impact at the government level. So that could be the role of research, teaming up with government to cast the light on here there is a need, or here your budget is bringing more gender inequality, that it is fostering gender equality. Because most time government may not be aware of that. They don't, they are gender blind. You see, they don't really see that the policies that they are going to implement will have an impact on gender, on the different gender, and especially women most times. So that can be the role. That can be the role of research. I mean, casting lights on those this consequence of gender neutral budget, so that government understand better and a government can take the right measure, mitigating measure in this regard. So I also want to maybe speak about the example of Rwanda. So when it comes to Rwanda, Rwanda has a gender monitoring office, and that gender monitoring office at the level of the Prime Minister office is an office that allows for to ensure that all ministries are fulfilling their commitment when it comes to gender, what they have said they would do, the target they have set for gender. They are there is an office at the level of the Prime Minister that is following up and ensuring that it is really applied. So it's a very strong model. So it's also a country that we can look to when it comes to gender monitoring, gender responsive budgeting, and so on and so forth, because on the continent they are very advanced, if I may say. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I'm learning all sorts of new things. For example, how elaborate that gender responsive budgeting process is. It's a very elaborate process. I like that it's more than just allocating money. It involves participation of different actors at different points. And I think what you've started to do is to highlight some of the models that we need to scale. And I'm turning to Boaz with this same question. what are some of the models that can be scaled in developing effective policies in the ARD space? If you could share with us.
Thanks so much, Doreen. I think the key word in what you've just said is effective policies. I've been monitoring the discussions on the chat, and some of them are speaking to the issues that what Africa is lacking is not just the number, the type of policies. It's the type of policies that are translating into action and what they're intended for. So the keyword there is policy implementation. And I think that's the weakest link we have on the continent. Designing and putting in place a policy is the easiest part, but getting it translated to the original intention is the biggest challenge. And we're seeing it in algorithm. And I will give you a few examples. Maybe I can just illustrate this by what do we mean when we talk about policies? Start with, for example, designing a national vision, a strategy, an investment plan in agriculture or in gender. We have around, I think Jessica, you may correct me there, almost 45 countries on the continent out of 55 have what you would consider a comprehensive gender strategy. So the gender strategy is not a macro space. They provide ideas and guidelines broadly. But you have to really bring it down a little bit and begin to say, if it's a sector specific and you want to bring in gender, for example, for agriculture, what are the specific policy directions and guidelines at the sector level that speak to issues of gender? So now I'm moving it from the national level to the sector level. That's a policy. Then you begin to bring it down. And I think it will also begin to speak about the gender responsive budgeting. And I can touch about that very briefly. So when you read a national strategy that includes gender, you'll find paragraphs and statements that say, government will ensure that gender is inclusive and all factors that all the people that are affected are involved. Now, to a policymaker at that level, they said, oh, we have been very gender sensitive at the national level. Our policies address gender issues. You go to a sector level, and because they are activists from a gender perspective, you read an agriculture sector strategic plan. In the preamble, you read statements of gender that says, we will ensure that in the implementation of this strategy, gender is disaggregated and data is captured. You know, that's in the first section of the report, a policy direction at meso level or micro level. Then you're translating that strategy into a law and a regulation, because that's really the core package of the policies. Laws that speak about agriculture, that speak about other agriculture-related interventions like seed laws, fertilizer laws. When you read some of those laws, you don't find specific instruments that encourage and compel players to make sure that when you are really investing or providing budgeting at national planning level, even at sector level, you must put a certain percentage of budget that address gender-related issues. So gender language begins to get lost in the macro policies, but when it gets down into micro and meso level policies, it is lost. So how do you make sure that you compare government planning and policy formulation to make sure that statements of gender and gender inclusivity are not left at the national strategies and sector-specific plans, but they are part of the budgeting process? If you really spend some time and look at how budgeting processes are done, when you have sending guidelines from the Ministry of Finance for sector budgets, like the medium-term expenditure framework, because there has been a ministry or a group that has been saying we need to mainstream gender, they will put it as part of the guideline. Please ensure that you are gender sensitive. But when the Ministry of Finance is monitoring the budget on how much has the Ministry of Agriculture submitted, you will not find resources that are earmarked to address gender-specific issues that would be used as a condition. And the Ministry of Finance would not use it to say, because of lack of gender-related budget, we are not able to accept your resource, your budget. So this is how we really need to be very sensitive at practical level to make sure that there is a translation of policy ideas into action at the sector level, but also making sure that they are part of the budget. And if they are part of the budget, and like Anne and Jessica's comments around budget monitoring, gender monitoring, and if you're developing the monitoring and evaluation system of the sector strategy, to what extent do you put gender-specific indicators in terms of resources, human resources, financial resources, disaggregated data, and your reporting mechanism, the monitoring of your M&E system must be very targeted and instrumented in making sure that you are reporting in a way that it activates dialogue and involvement of those who are affected by the lack of the policy itself. If you go to the regulations, which is also part of the policy, since I talked about macro policy, meso policies, strategies, laws and regulations, then also administrative practices, the behavior and actions of people who allocate resources or even administer resources. The gender issues will not come into their mind in terms of what they are approving a budget. Now they will just look at the priorities that have been agreed, whether there is gender there or it's not, they will approve the budget. So that really compromises the entire inclusivity agenda. So I really wanted to bring it from that perspective that we need to do this more. And as Agora, we've been very deliberate. We've established the entire unit that addresses gender. It's part of our new strategy that cross-cuts across all our business lines. And we are intentional every we are going to be investing in. We are not only deliberately building businesses and private sector actors, but we are also chasing the number of jobs that are being created amongst gender as well as youth. Two, we are developing a monitoring and evaluation system that allows tracking of how many new jobs are being created that address gender-specific capabilities, either in the area of building seed companies or if you are establishing fertilizer associations, but also the whole story about voice. Because it's not just about jobs, it's the voice that people who are affected need to be speaking about their concerns. If you don't have an expert that is responsible on something that is affected for, it will always pass through the eyes of the policymakers. So we're really trying to be very deliberate. In some of the countries where we put these resources, we are seeing action happening. And then most of the players like you, under the guidance and the leadership of the African Union and NEPAD, providing the framework and the guidelines, the accountability tools, we take them into the country and make sure that we create models and practices that allow us to deliver these goods and services better in a gender inclusive way.
Thank you very much, Boaz. I'm sure that the award policy fellows are learning a lot and beginning to identify some of the areas that they might want to consider, even as they formulate their policy innovation projects later in their fellowship cycle. You mentioned something very important about the different levels, the different policy levels, the macro, the meso, the micro levels. And that what I'm taking away from you, Boaz, is that we need to go beyond more than ticking a box. You know, so we've been very good at adopting a certain language and putting it in the strategy and in the documents, and then we say, okay, the strategy says this, yeah, so we tick a box. So beyond moving a box, then that we need to be very intentional so that we are able to make significant progress towards our end goal. And also breaking some of these things down for the different levels. I'm seeing a lot of questions. If you could tell us who you're directing your questions to, that would be great. Otherwise, the panelists might have to, I will maybe read them out and whoever wants to jump in can jump in. But please let us know which panelist you're directing your question to. And before I come back to your questions, I'd like to go back to Jessica and to ask Jessica what we need to pay attention to. Some of it has been mentioned already, but what is it that we need to pay attention to as we seek to design effective policies? So there are some things that have already been mentioned in our conversation this afternoon, but is there one thing that you want to highlight that we need to pay attention to even as we seek to design effective policies? So Boaz said it's not just about policies, but it's effective policies and going into the implementation. Is there anything that you want to highlight that we need to pay attention to?
From what I already said, or you want me to elaborate more on research and development? So what?
If there's anything else that you think we need to pay attention to as we design effective policies, you could highlight as I read the questions and identify whom to allocate them to.
No, I think I said it all in my presentation. The human capital aspect is very dear to me because I'm working in the human capital division. And I think one of the questions, if I may respond to it, was about emotional intelligence. They asked, how do we incorporate emotional intelligence in the trainings? And what we had a trainer, it was a very, those women in processing, they were from rural areas, some were from, big entrepreneurs. We had different level in the room. So the trainers needed to adapt and make sure they had they engaged with the women. They didn't just show PowerPoint. They were really, getting some feedback, having very interactive discussion. And the trainers on emotional intelligence took very practical cases, like study case or how do you react in such and such configuration. These are the 6 emotions that all human beings are going through. And at the end of the training, some of the women came and were like, they were having some like disease, or they were feeling bad in their body because they were not dealing with their emotion. You know, in Africa, women are told to restrict themselves, restrict their emotion. And because of that training, just the fact that they were allowed to put words on the things they were experiencing, I think they felt better. And I think it will transform the way they would relate to themselves and to the people around them when it comes to emotion. So yeah, training and human capital for me is key. Coaching, mentoring, all these things that are human to human based are very key to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you very much. So you've responded to the question from Rashida. She talked about emotional intelligence. There's a question from Adeline. Adeline is asking, evidence with current data to back up the relevance of gender in agricultural policies is often lacking. How can this be addressed at the different levels? I wonder if, Adeline, you can say who are addressing the question to, or which of the panelists would want to take this up. And then there's a question from Lillian Tresha. Lillian is asking, how can we ensure that gender-responsive interventions avoid unintended consequences? Very interesting. And do we have some pre-intervention social impact assessment, or do you have any resources to share? How do we monitor effectiveness and consequences? We will try and respond to all your questions. For the ones that we can't, we will endeavor to find a way of ensuring this conversation continues beyond this webinar. Adeline says any of the panelists can respond to her question about data. Okay, Sarah's question, I believe, will go to Boaz. Agra's focus has always been on cereal, but you find areas where women dominate, such as vegetables and fruits, which may not have much interest to the industry and related in Agra's approaches. Will you call this gender inclusiveness? Very interesting, Sarah. So maybe we start with, I don't know who wants to take the question from Adeline about data, and then we'll go to Boaz. In the meanwhile, I'm reminding our participants, our audience, please go to Menti. There's a link in the chat for you to respond to our 2 questions about what we need to pay attention to and the kinds of interventions we need to promote. Boaz?
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I think Sarah's question is really critical. We've deliberated about this ourselves in the organization previously. So our strategy was focused initially to really look at the major crops, cereals that are instrumental in changing the incomes of livelihood and food security. So we did not want to spread too thin by focusing on everything and never be able to reach everybody. So we said, if we focus on some of the key commodities, and help a farmer to be able to access a right seed, the fertilizer, and the agriculture extension, they'll be able to move the tipping point beyond which they, and with access to markets, they are able to access other nutritious kind of products. So we've learned from that experience and said, we need to look at it from at a broader perspective, especially learning from the food systems discussions that a healthy diet requires various combination of food on the table. And not only just cereals, because we've learned that in most countries, even 70% of the households are unable to meet a healthy diet in terms of the cost. So they resort to cereals because they are relatively cheaper. And that's not solving nutritional challenges. So from that learning and perspective, we're saying, let's broaden our horizon rather than focusing on cereals, create a food basket, support a food basket in terms of the kind of the right seed that will produce a tomato, if you like, just using that as an example. If that is very instrumental in bringing the right nutritious food on the table. And let the countries prioritize and come up with the key commodities they would want to put in across, and then we will support those. So it's a shift on the mindset And you will notice, and I think, Doreen, you asked me the question at the beginning, AGRA is no longer the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. The shift is that Green Revolution coming from Asia was just bring seed fertilizer to be able to increase production productivity. But now we are talking about markets, we're talking about food systems, we're talking about value chains, we're talking about the environment, the climate change, the regenerative agriculture. You can never deliver a food basket in a total without looking at the entire food basket initiative. So that's the change in terms of strategy. And to your question, Sarah, we have shifted to make sure that we are tackling all commodities, focusing on making sure that the food basket or your household is able to access the right food in the right quantity, in the right nutritional balance to be able to move the agenda forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Boaz. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I want to take just two last questions before I go back to my panel and ask them for their parting shots. So I'm going to take the question from, there's a question that has been directed to Jessica and Boaz, but I'll request Jessica to respond to it. From Rosemary. Rosemary is saying, to achieve effective gender-sensitive budgeting, we need champions in key ministries of planning and finance. What strategies can we use to get their attention? So that's one question to Jessica. And then I want to ask one last question to Anne from Maximila. Maximila is asking, what has your organization done on the involvement of extension staff in development and empowerment of the same on implementation of gender responsive policies in the ag extension, given they're the contact point for the farmers, especially in agricultural production and marketing. So Jessica to talk about champions in budgeting, and then I'll invite Anne to talk about extension, and then we'll go to the last round of questions with the parting shot as we wind up. Over to you, Jessica.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. The question is, and I wanted to address it when Dr. Boaz was talking. I think he said it all. Dr. Boaz, thank you very much for your previous intervention on gender budgeting and monitoring. It was excellent. But talking about champion in the Ministry of Planning and Finance, this is something we want to develop at the level of the AUD and NAPAD. We want to have broader stakeholder consultation and make sure we assign focal points when it comes to gender issue in those ministries in all African countries. Because so far our entry points in gender are the Ministry of Gender. And we know in terms of power play within a nation, most time gender ministry, they don't have money and they don't have much power. So making sure we have champion and key champion, because we also notice that sometimes we will assign gender focal point, and those gender focal point that will come, they don't have any clue what is gender, what is going on, and they don't really have influence within their ministry. So we need maybe to target the permanent secretary or people that are at key position, and that could become a gender champion. So now we are still working on what could be the incentive for them, because we can have them at an initial meeting, but then they can lose interest because they will have so many things going on. So what could be the incentive for them to stay throughout, and maybe making them travel, gather to some places, talking about gender and pushing for gender can be a way also to structure our group of champions throughout African countries. So these are the things I'm working on, and in 2023, these are the things I will start implementing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I see us coming back to you a lot, asking for links to these resources. So I know you will indulge us. So over to you, Anne, if you could talk to the question about extension officers and how we are engaging them.
Thank you very much, Doreen, for that question. FAO works with the government in various ways to strengthen capacity of the staff, including extension officers. Specifically on the gender issues, FAO has first and foremost supported the development of the national, of the agriculture gender policy within the Ministry of Agriculture, and also supporting the domestication of this policy at the counties level through integration into county sector strategies and the county integrated development plans. So that is in as far as the policy level is concerned. In addition to that, we support capacity strengthening of the staff in terms of integrating gender concerns into strategies and programs and interventions. So trainings and skills develop, capacity strengthening in that area. And recently we have also supported the revision of the National Agricultural Sector Extension Policy, ensuring that gender concerns have been integrated in such a way that even in the rollout and implementation of that policy, the gender issues will be integrated, and even to the extent of bringing on board the aspect of digitization to ensure that even where challenges of extension officer capacity is concerned are well addressed. And maybe just in relation to this, just to touch a bit on the question on the data and evidence, just a contribution towards that. Of course, it's not exhaustive, but I think one way we could ensure that we have up-to-date data is to have very good and effective M&E frameworks. One challenge we have with the policies, particularly in the Kenyan context, is that policy monitoring and evaluation of policy impact is not a very common thing. And I think it is something that we need to invest in more regularly. Government needs to ensure that once policies are implemented, the tracking is done so that we see whether we are on the right track or whether we are digressing. And also we need to be evaluating the impact of policy even before we think of so what after we have completed implementation of a certain policy decision. We need to evaluate the impact before, so that also informs the next course of action. Thank you, Doreen.
Thank you very much, Anne. The bad news is I have to bring this conversation to an end. It's very exciting. The good news is that this is just one of the series of conversations we are having. Within the GRASP Fellowship, we are curating a series of conversations such as this ones on how we can foster equitable policies and more. So fret not, worry not, we will continue having these conversations and hopefully we can exhaust the questions that you're having, and we can also continue having other conversations that we have not been able to have today. And so as I come to the tail end of this conversation, I want to go back to the panelists, and I'll start with the same order I started with. So I'll start with Boaz, and I'll go to Anne and Jessica. And I'm asking you your final question as you give us your parting shot. Is there one thing that you could highlight as a key progress that promises to move the needle towards gender responsive agricultural policies? I'm sure the picture is not bleak. There's good progress, there's good news. What is the one highlight that you think promises to advance us towards that goal? Back to you, Boaz.
I think my comment there is, I'm excited that I see a lot of momentum on the continent by those whose daily job are excited about bringing gender up front. In fact, even experts, researchers are turning into gender activists. That's very encouraging, because without stronger action and being angry with business as usual, we cannot make things move. And my parting message on that space is that I would challenge the FAOs that have been brought on board, including the mentors. Each of us has a responsibility to be a leader. Policies alone cannot help us deliver what we need. The policies must be implemented. Even if they're implemented, they require capacity. And the capacity also requires leadership. And leadership is not about a head of state level. It's about a minister, it's about a permanent secretary, it's about a head of a private sector organization, it's about a head of a family, it's about anything that you have control over. So I challenge our mentors, our FAOs that have been brought on board. I challenge the mentors, I challenge ourselves that we have a responsibility in this part of the generation to be able to make a change in the way we do business. business as usual is not going to take us anywhere. We are so far away from achieving the targets. But I'm really encouraged by the fact that in many of the governments and players that we see, there is a lot of anger and angry to get things better. And that's really encouraging that unless we redo business as usual, we will not be able to achieve what we are looking for. So I'm really happy to see that this kind of program is happening. I like the fact that it's going to be more regular. I like the fact that we are going to be bringing more players and actors really to activate some sense of responsibility, the sense of encouragement amongst ourselves, the sense of not sitting back and wait to be given, to be supported and cry for not being given the right resources. We have a responsibility to bring everybody on the table and be able to push for making sure that progress is happening, and we're challenging ourselves to do that as well. I will end it with that, and thank you so much for inviting me to be the panelist on this group.
Thank you, Boaz. Indeed, let's get emotional. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Doreen. For me, the one point I would like to highlight as a positive is the fact that governments have embraced digitization, because digitization will help accelerate implementation of policies. For example, in terms of making service delivery inputs more accessible, enhancing market linkages, and so on and so forth. So I think what needs to be done is to scale up that and really institutionalize and scale that up so that services such as extension services, advisory services, information on weather, pests, and so on can reach the farmers as fast as possible through digital means. And of course, to emphasize that there is also a digital divide. So even as we embrace digital technology, we also have to do it in such a way that we try and close that digital gap between the genders, because studies show that there is quite a significant digital divide between the genders, the men and women. So we must use methodologies that ensure that we are closing that gap as we are embracing the technology. And let me also take this opportunity to thank you very much, Director Susan, Doreen, and the entire fraternity at Award for inviting me to be a panelist here. I'm excited. It's an exciting journey, and looking forward to another encounter like this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Let's capitalize on the opportunity that digitalization has presented. And finally to you, Jessica.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Mine is, I'm very excited that gender responsive agriculture is something that is more embraced, accepted by the academia, by development practitioner community and policymakers. Because when the NEPAD Planning and Coordinating Agency, which is now the African Union Development Agency, when in 2014 they got a decision to create the first gender climate change agriculture support program, GCAS, it was something that was very new. There were no initiative like this. So we wanted to mitigate the effect of climate change through climate smart agriculture, targeting women, making sure we improve their livelihoods and so on and so forth. So the landscape was completely different. And today we can see that it is booming everywhere. You see every international organization has something incorporating gender responsive agriculture. Let it be Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the AFDB, and so on and so forth. You also have a collaboration between Cornell University and Makerere University called Gender Responsive Researcher Equipped for Agricultural Transformation. Great. So everybody is in this space and know that there's something, since women are the majority of the smallholder farmers, what can we do to target them specifically? What can we do to, to improve their lives and livelihoods? So I'm very happy for that. And I think that, and this is an address to the fellow, I think it shows that we are going in the right direction. Even this GRAS fellowship is the right, it's a good thing. It's a good signal, if I may say so. We are going in the right direction, and hopefully we'll have more tangible results and will have greater impact felt on the ground, because that is what we are here for. At the end of the day, no matter what policy we take, no matter what fellowship we create, if we don't change the lives of the people we are talking about all the time, then we are useless, if I may say so. So let's change the world. Let's do it together. Thank you.
Wow, what a better point to end it. Ultimately, we are working to change the lives of people, and that's what we should keep our focus on. Thank you very much to my distinguished panel. You have been an amazing panel. We have had such an engaging discussion until we've run out of time. And so it's already hour, and I'd like to ask that you please indulge us if I could borrow just a maximum of 10 minutes of your time. So I will give us the next 10 minutes or less to wind this up. We've had such an engaging conversation, such an engaging discussion. I've had a wonderful audience, so many questions. If we had an audience that was not engaging, I'm sure by the time it was 30 minutes, we would have finished, the three panelists and us. But thank you so much for keeping us engaged, for being interested. We will be sending you the recording, and you can continue to listen in, or let us know if you want us to contact any of the panelists with for any of the reference materials they mentioned. We will do that. But for now, if you could please just give us like 10 minutes at most of your time, because I would like to invite Michelle, Dr. Michelle Mbocho, the Deputy Director of Programs at Award, who is then going to give us some closing remarks, and she will invite Dorothy Muhebi to give us the vote of thanks, and we will close the event. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Doreen. Wow, this has been an afternoon of rich conversation, knowledge sharing, again on the relevance of gender responsive policy in relation to agricultural development in the continent. I think all the panelists have yet again pointed out to some of the urgent issues we need to pay attention to as a continent. These are no secrets to any of us here: food insecurity, food costs, nutrition insecurity, education, access to basic needs, vulnerability to a changing climate, among others. And we all have agreed again here that these will require a very strong policy environment. And of course, coherence. I think this is Anne who talked about coherence. If we want to see positive transformation in the continent. I noted that leadership at the continental level has been very much committed to changing the business as usual strategies, and also showing their readiness to translate some of the plans, the investment plans, the framework into real action, and promoting stakeholder engagement at different levels. But while we commend these efforts of our governmental and non-governmental bodies, the civil society, the private sectors, and others, we've also heard today that it will be critical, if we want to see sound results, that the policymaker, together with the wider society, look beyond the policy formulation and get really into the effective and gender-responsive policy implementation processes. This has come again and again. And here I really like the step-by-step analysis that Boaz described to us. What objectives should we look into? What direction should we take? What laws, what instruments, what policy areas need to be prioritized, and at what level? And many more factors that will help us devise more practical and feasible ways to revisit our policy system so that they can serve us better. The panelists and the audience have also emphasized the need for evidence for gender-responsive policy making. It seemed that we are hearing a lot about the gender gap in the agricultural sector. We are hearing about the market constraint. We are hearing about various environmental change and how all these affect many groups, including women and the youth. There's also been a lot of traction around priority areas for policy formulation and implementation, including how we bring the issues of cultural and social norm, the better targeting of the groups, affirmative actions, inclusive stakeholder engagement, and more importantly, gender responsive budgeting. And I think Jessica will definitely come to you and all of you are our panelists today, because I think this is one of the things that remains very key, not just at the policy level, even in our institution, when we think about allocating resources to actually integrate gender in our processes. From the discussion of today, my main takeaway is that as much as there are bottlenecks, there is also hope. And beyond this hope, we need to be very deliberate, intentional in how we really want to contribute to the agenda on gender in the policy dialogue. Because as Boaz said, each and every one of us has a role to play. We have responsibilities for our families, for our institutions, for our society, for our continent. As a word, I believe that with the launch of the GRASP Fellowship today, we will definitely come to the forefront of these processes and contribute in different ways to transform the agricultural landscape and give a better Africa to our people, because this is what it is. It's not about having policies there, but policies that are working for the benefit of our people. So Boaz, Anne, and Jessica, we accept the challenges, the challenges that you are putting to us today. And we are very excited that we can count on you to take us through this journey as we launch our new fellowship today. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And at this point, I would like to invite my colleague, Dorothy, to give us the vote of thanks. Over to you, Dorothy.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Michelle, and good afternoon to everybody, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dorothy Muhebi, and I'm the Deputy Director at Award for Operations. And like my colleagues, I'm really excited about today, and we've been looking forward to this day. So it's been a very exciting afternoon. And I think my colleague Michelle has so eloquently summarized the afternoon's highlights. It's been very informative, and there's so much that we've learned about policies, effective policies and implementation in relation to gender and agriculture. So I hope you've all learned something. I just want to thank you all for your participation on behalf of the entire award team. And our special thank you to the guest speakers, Boaz, Dr. Boaz, who is known to us from AGRA. And thank you very much, Anne Chele and Jessica Ano. The three of you have really added so much value to our knowledge on policies and gender responsiveness and the subject at hand. And of course, I want to thank and recognize the people that have made us come together this afternoon. And those are the GRASP fellows and our mentor and the mentors. We are not able to see you at this point, but for the fellows, you know, being selected to be part of this fellowship does not come easy. I think you all know that. You are chosen as the best from the very best. And in the same breath, it puts a lot of responsibility to you as what you achieve, or I dare whisper not achieve, is going to impact the livelihoods of so many, especially the most vulnerable. And we've been hearing that over and over again. And for the mentors, it's always humbling for us when we get such high profile individuals, because we've had an opportunity to look at the profiles that most of you from the list that we have, and that you're able to sacrifice your time and to share your knowledge and to make an impact to the less experienced professionals that you'll be working with. I truly say thank you and thank you and thank you to you. We look forward to interacting with you during this fellowship period. And of course, we also want to extend our appreciation to our donors who are not able to join us this afternoon, USAID, from the Washington team and also from the team from the countries that we draw our fellows and mentors from. The other players that were not able to join us, but I think the director in her opening remarks mentioned them. We just want to thank all of them. And finally, I also want to take this opportunity to thank all my award colleagues under the leadership of our director, who you heard, Dr. Susan Carrier. I also want to specifically thank our moderator, Doreen Odongo, who puts this webinar together with her team. And Michelle, of course, with your team and the rest of the award team. We just want to thank all of you. Thank you all. And with that, I wish you a pleasant afternoon or morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. And with that, we've come to the close of our event. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, high-level panelists. Thank you so much. And excellent moderation, Doreen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. And with that, we've come to the close of our event. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, high-level panelists. Thank you so much. And excellent moderation, Doreen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.